Hello, and welcome to Exploring Intersections, Catholic Sisters on Racism, Migration, and Climate. Here's our host, Cherish Budzinski.
Hello, and welcome to our second Exploring Intersections conversation about some of the biggest social issues of our time and the complex intersections of these topics with racism, migration, and climate. This program is made possible through the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Region 10. Whether you're a person of faith or someone with no religious tradition, we're glad you're here. Over the coming year, we'll host monthly panel conversations about the topics that shape our lives as humankind. Among them, food security, human trafficking, gun violence, affordable housing, healthcare, and much more. Last month, we talked with our expert panelists about gender equity. If you missed that conversation, you can still see the recorded version on YouTube or download a podcast version from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. We are committed to helping one another along on our journey of gaining deeper understanding of these topics. So in addition to these conversations with our panelists, we have some suggested next steps, and we'll have additional resources, which you can find on our website, exploringintersections.org. Please note, members of our live Zoom audience are encouraged to submit questions for our panelists to consider. You can do so by using the Q&A function. In this episode of Exploring Intersections, Catholic Sisters on Racism, Migration, and Climate, we're talking about care of creation. Here are some facts from NASA's Vital Signs of the Planet. Carbon dioxide levels in our air are at their highest point in 650,000 years. 19 of the warmest years in documented history have taken place since the year 2000. The Earth's polar ice sheets are losing 428 billion metric tons per year. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, surface ocean water has increased in acidity by 30%, a direct result of carbon dioxide humans are increasingly contributing to the atmosphere. And researchers say the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, also referred to as the eighth continent, includes common everyday plastic items we all use and toss, perhaps without a thought. Plastic bags, lighters, toothbrushes, water bottles, fishing gear, cell phones, and more, floating in a toxic stew of microplastics. National Geographic reports similar patches are growing in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. More than unsightly oceanic garbage dumps, these plastics threaten entire food chains and leach out chemicals, such as the notorious BPA. The planetary crisis we face is real and sobering, not to mention overwhelming. Some find it easier to say they simply don't believe it. After all, if we declare it untrue, we can abdicate responsibility. In today's discussion, we embrace the science. We admit our personal responsibility and seek to better understand the challenges we face. What exactly does it mean to care for creation? How do the impacts of climate change affect the poor, marginalized, and most vulnerable among us? And what are some of the steps we can take to be wise stewards of the Earth's resources and create a sustainable future for humankind? As always, in addition to providing thoughtful insights and nuanced conversation, we will offer action items we can carry forward as we embrace the challenge of caring for creation. To help us explore today's topic, we are joined by three panelists. Catherine McComas Bossie is a sophomore at Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin, where she is student body president and is designing a major focused on climate justice. She grew up in Shakopee, Minnesota, where her parents instilled in her the need to prioritize justice and find the sanctity of the feminine divine, especially in creation. Her love of nature has led to work experiences at a YMCA family camp on the edge of the Boundary Waters Canoe area and in community at a Catholic worker farm in beautiful Lake City, Minnesota. She is committed to seeking food justice, water protection, and youth advocacy, a commitment demonstrated by her work with the state legislature and like-minded young people in bringing about a time when no decision is made about youth without youth. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to start today by saying that I'm tuning in on the stolen land of the Anishinaabe people, and I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you, Catherine. Sister Kristen Tomey has spent the past several years working on sustainable agriculture and food justice in the rural Midwest. As an undergrad, Sister Kristen volunteered with a local nonprofit that served Central American immigrants, many of whom had been farm workers. Upon graduating, she became a social worker with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Belize. When she returned to the States, she coordinated a food pantry. This combination of experiences opened her eyes to the intersections between environmental degradation and various forms of oppression, with a focus on food and agriculture. She joined the Dominican Sisters of Sinsinawa 8 years ago, and since then has served at an organic produce farm, an eco-justice center, and a summer farming program for high school students. She spent the past 5 years at her community's Mother House farm in rural Wisconsin, where she ran a collaborative farming program to train and support beginning farmers, and of course, grow food. She now lives in Chicago, where she is working on her master's at Catholic Theological Union. Welcome, Sister Kristen.
Thank you for having me. Today I am calling in from what is now known as Chicago, the ancestral homeland of the Anishinaabe people, as well as the Ojibwe, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and dozens of other tribes, including the Miami, the Ho-Chunk, the Menominee, Sac, Fox, Kickapoo, and Illiniwek. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Leah Clyburn is an activist and organizer in St. Louis, Missouri, who advocates for the advancement of underrepresented constituents, fighting for social, economic, educational, and environmental justice for all through a spiritual lens. Her focus includes community-based building, education, and leadership training. Her personal and professional experiences have enabled her to advocate for families from all demographics and serve as an activist for Missouri to raise the minimum wage and democratic reform during the 2018 election year. Currently, Leah is the senior organizing representative with Missouri Sierra Club's Beyond Coal National Campaign and co-founder of Community First Plus. In these roles, she partners with community leaders and local organizations throughout Missouri in addressing environmental justice concerns in relation to our daily lives. Welcome, Leah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I currently reside on occupied land of the Osage and so many other tribes here in Missouri. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leah. Of course, there's so much that ties into this issue of caring for creation, and we can't address all of it within the limited time we have. So we are focusing on the unique areas of expertise our panelists bring to this conversation. Let's start off the conversation with your personal experiences. Tell me what experience in your life made care of creation a passion for you? Leah, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This answer can go in so many different directions. I am a first generation American in our family, one of three. My family is originally from Jamaica, and my mother immigrated to this country in her early teens. And though I was very blessed and honored to be able to get the opportunity to go back, and every chance I got, we went every August, and I would spend time under the sun, under the moon, and the stars, and seeing how small I was, this beautiful, vast world that we live in, while also hearing the roaring in of the water. And our family's faith base is rooted in Episcopalian. We're Episcopal, and in that I was raised to be good stewards. And what that really meant was shown as an example throughout my young adulthood. That not only am I brother's keeper, but I am responsible for the land and the water and the animals that are surround me every day. That they too get to have a future just as well as myself and my neighbors next to me.
I love that. Sister Kristen, tell us what experience in your life made care of creation a passion for you.
So much like Leah, I had experiences in my young life and my childhood that I think instilled in me just a deep love of nature and of being outside. My family went camping a lot growing up, and I think being able to have interaction with the natural world and to be able to grow in a sense of awe and wonder did more than I realized for me at the time. And like my bio said, it was later in my life when I began to encounter people who were suffering in the same way that the earth was suffering, that was going hand in hand, and realizing that disregard for the earth was also harming the most vulnerable, sort of sparked this love of nature and this awe and wonder, and propelled me into a feeling of responsibility for more intentional care of earth.
Beautiful. And Catherine, tell us about what experiences in your life made care of creation important for you.
Yeah. Similar to Sister Kristen, I think that when I was growing up, I was so lucky to be able to play in creation. And I think that play is a really underrated way of getting to know creation and getting acquainted and falling in love with creation. So that play looked like a lot of things. It sometimes looked like walking to school in my own world or camping, but also attending summer camps. I was lucky enough to attend a summer camp facilitated by the Sisters of St. Joseph up at St. Catherine's University in Minnesota. All the years that it ran.
Oh, we seem to have frozen video.
With creation, but I also think that one of the real turning points. Oh no!
It's okay. You're in and out. Go ahead.
I think that one of the real turning points for me was when I realized that we are not separate from creation, but that humans are creation too, and that in caring for creation, that included caring for myself and for my neighbors. Yeah.
That is such an important note too, that humans are a part of it. And so caring for creation includes caring for fellow human beings. Well said. So when we talk about care of creation, there are so many facets that feed into that, including the human aspect. How do we identify the opportunities and prioritize our work? Any thoughts from the panelists on that?
Yeah, so, when I think about everyone's opportunity, right, you can't help but to think about what can we actually do, right? And it's like every day, there's little things that we as individuals can do, but the sole entrenched issue is the fact that these environmental injustices that are happening are targeted and placed on various areas throughout our country, throughout our world, and allowed to exist based on allowed to exist and reflect on different communities based on race and economic income, right? Yeah. And so when we see these things happening, like in my previous background, though I was able to go and hang out by the beach at night with with my family in Jamaica. I was not raised to do that here in the United States, right? That is an injustice at the most smallest form in some cases, how you want to look at it. But then when you look broadly, right? We look at like places like New Orleans where they have Cancer Row, right? Where there's specific communities that are located in areas that was once protected but no longer, right? And we have to start asking ourselves more questions that start reflecting that these issues that we are addressing are due to the effects of a more public situation, right? Which is basically unfortunate corporate greed, right? And how it falls on the backs of very private people, right? And we have to get to a point where we no longer can just allow ourselves to be isolated or stand on the sidelines and just say, oh, well, that's a sad situation, but actually step up and step forward and be like, we need and we demand to do better. Because the fact of the matter, at the end of the day, whatever happens over here does find its way to us all. The water still flows, the wind still blows, and the land is rooted underneath, and we're all still connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Sister Kristen, any thoughts on how do we prioritize that work and identify those opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's an important question because something as big as care of creation, climate change can feel so ominous, so overwhelming. It's really hard to know where to start. And something that helps me is to remember that, much like we all shared in our first statements, love is the most powerful motivating force. And so I think oftentimes we feel a lot of really frightening emotions around when we have these conversations today, for good reason. But we aren't going to be motivated. We aren't motivated to care or protect that which we don't love and the people that we don't love. And so I think the first priority is to really take steps to cultivate an active love and wonder and awe for the natural world. There's a quote that Pope Francis has in his encyclical Laudato Si, where he talks about the world being, rather than a problem to be solved, it's a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise. And that's not to shut our eyes to the problems, but it sustains us. So from there, we can look at, okay, what's my sphere of influence? There's hundreds of decisions we can make on a day-to-day level, little ones, choosing to hang dry my clothes rather than put them in the dryer, how I eat, what I buy, how I travel. And that's all really easily available on the internet. But I think when we attack the problem as a problem only, it can get it can be very draining. So
really good points. I love that both of you have spoken about activism growing out of a place of love for the planet, actually. And Catherine, I know you have talked about your love of the Boundary Waters canoe area. Tell me about how you identify some opportunities and prioritize your work, or what advice would you give to others for how they tackle that?
Yeah, I think that as a young person, my generation has been inducted into this eco-anxiety, but has not been given necessarily a lot of space to build upon that anxiety or even build upon our love for this climate and for this planet and for each other. And so I think what I see in a lot of my peers is this real overwhelming anxiety and a real question of what to do with it. And instead of being welcomed into spaces where these discussions are being had, we often are pushed to the sidelines in these conversations. And so I think that something that I would like to implore people to do is to recognize that there are so many opportunities for engagement, but to also understand that not everyone feels included or welcomed into those spaces. And so to enter into those spaces actively and intentionally, but also with a lot of care for other people and a lot of attention paid to the ways that we're carving spaces for other folks to engage. And also to sit in this tension of there's such a big problem and there's so much to be done, but also that we are only individuals, and to understand that that tension can propel us forward rather than hold us back. And that when we are not only able to love creation fully, in terms of nature or wilderness, which I think are terms that are pretty loaded, but when we are able to love one another too, that includes trusting that other people are doing work that we can't get to in that moment. And that includes trusting that we can all move individually, but also as a collective into a more sustainable future and to build more sustainable infrastructures. But that we won't always be aware of the work that's being done.
Yeah, well said. I think it's also important to acknowledge that everybody has different, as Sister Kristen said, different spheres of influence. We all have different aptitudes. We all have access to different tools. And each one of us can determine on our own how we can use those to help protect the planet and encourage others to make choices that are healthier for the planet as well.
Yeah, I
So,
think also too that you just real quick, it's so important that we get really clear too. This was that part that that Catherine was talking about, that we challenge ourselves, right? There's a lot, there's like, this is a system, right, that has kept us all divided in so many different ways, right? And so sometimes, you know, with that, when you get into that tension, you end up finding that, like, you know, it might feel like there's blame being pointed at one group of people or one group identified as folks, right? But none of us just started this, right? Right? None of us were the ones who did this, right? But we do have the opportunity and the responsibility to acknowledge the stuff that did happen and to take forth the actions necessary to change it, right? So step into that curiosity and that courageousness to being like, you know, though I didn't do it, I see where the harm began. I acknowledge the representation that I hold in this space of those who might have done it, right? Who might have initiated these issues, but also how I want to also use, like, to what Sister Christine was saying about, I want to leverage my power that I hold in this moment to gain a conclusion that benefits all people, that brings us to a space of equity, right? And just transition for all, right? Because we don't have any more time to have a pity party, right? I'll high five you and I'll hug you and I'll walk you through it, but we gotta end up on the other side together.
Yeah, we're past pity party time. I agree. So we touched briefly on this, but what are some practical steps that each of you are taking, or that you would recommend that the average person take to care for creation every day? Are there little things that they can do, and what is the secret to making it a daily practice? Sister Kristen?
Well, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I wish there were. I write a self-help book about it. But I think for me, the secret is what I talked about in the last question, the cultivating an attitude that from that attitude, we make the choices day to day. Some people are activists. Some people are really savvy with advocacy and laws. And I think my other two panelists will probably talk more about those actions. And I, have spent the past several years just kind of literally on the ground farming. And so I think I tend toward the really practical. So I think things that people can do on a day-to-day basis are just so many little decisions that when we take the time to think about them and be more intentional, one at a time, like I mentioned in the last question, there's so many decisions about, what kind of energy and power we use. And, do I need to dry my clothes? Do I have an opportunity to hang dry them? I'll talk more about food probably later, but I think for some of us, that's the way that we are most, especially city dwellers, it can be the daily thing that most connects us to the earth. And so starting to look at food in a new way can be really transformative. So I think it all comes back to like, what are my natural tendencies, and start there. Am I more of an outward focused letter writing, congressperson calling? Great, I go that way. I challenge myself to take on new practices as I go along, but it's also important to look at like, what's easier for me? Where can I start? And just start there, and then one step at a time.
I do think that it's really important to acknowledge the fact that this work isn't easy. Is this work easy for anybody? I don't think
No, it's not. No, right? Like, I mean, I enjoy using electricity, right? Like,
yeah, right.
Right? I don't like the dark, so blame that on my older brother, but I digress. But like at the end of the day, right? Like we as people, we are consumers, right? Like the theory of, or the phrase that the customer's always right. Yeah, because we have input, right? And so, you know, there's a stat that says, for just in reflection to Missouri, right? So if 2.5 million cars stop driving in 1 year, it would be equivalent to 26 million tons of carbon of CO2, right? But that's only 1 year.
Yeah.
We need that we can. So is that actually feasible, right? Cars are not it, right? We need the largest impact on our climate are our fossil fuel utility companies and using fossil fuel as actually the means of resource to provide us with electricity. We know, and we have been successful at using wind and solar. And we as a people need to hold those entities accountable for how they actually plan out for what they're going to use in their resource plan, or what they would call an IRP, right? And by asking our utilities those questions, so what is the percentage of my electricity comes from coal or what is it, coal or fuel or natural gases, and then how much of that comes from, right, wind and solar. We can ask those questions now because of the work that was done before, right? We can say, no, I want this specific amount, or I want to actually engage in more resources that will provide me and my house the opportunity, right, to be more efficient. And what programs do you actually have to do that? Right. And we need to hold our policyholders, the people that worked really hard to get our vote. We need to hold them accountable to make sure that these policies are put in place for any developers that come into our community, right, to actually having access to those resources to basically upgrade, right? And then also, how do we dispose? So as people, right, we just need to open our mouths, because we can plug in our cars all day long, and that's wonderful and great. But if we're burning coal on the other end of it, well, you know, we're just increasing the issue, right?
Yeah. So. Absolutely. And Catherine, I know we're having some issues with your video stream, but as I understand it, you can still hear us, and we'd still love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you have thoughts on practical steps that you would recommend that the average person could take on a daily basis?
Yeah, thank you so much. I am really struggling with my video right now.
Yeah, it's okay.
I think, I think that first and foremost, well, maybe not foremost, but first, I think food is the social and climate justice that we encounter 3 times a day. And to me, it feels like one of the largest manifestations and one of the largest aspects of our footprint that is a continuous choice, and that has the potential to have such a big impact on how we live our life and how we walk through this world is is changing our relationship with food and the justice implications of the food that we consume. But also, I think that it's important to find or strike a balance of working and demanding, like working on behalf of or for and demanding systemic change, while also practicing individual sustainability. And I think that that balance will look and feel different for each individual. But I think that it's you can't have one without the other in a way that feels authentic, I think, or in a way that feels truly impactful to the current state that we are in. You know, like individual solutions alone will not address the fact that 70% of the carbon emissions are produced by 10 corporations. They just won't address that fact. But if we, but that also doesn't make them not useful and not important. I think holding both of those priorities at all times and walking through the world focused on both of them is where I feel a daily practice is built. But
wonderful.
And I think that's so true, because at the end of the day, these are all public health issues, right? Like when we're talking, like I'm learning all about farming this with my food apartheid activists that I've grown to love and learn so much from. But that's because I never learned about that stuff before. I didn't have access to land like that before. And there's so many people who don't, right? And why? So the other part is to ask why. Not just, oh, they don't want to. Don't go by the stereotypes or the dog whistles, as we say, or the so-and-so norms, right? Of people you don't know, or the accepted visuals, right? But ask why. You know, these are all things that if we go and talk to our grandparents or their parents, you know, there's a whole saying of you don't buy meat from nobody you don't know if you don't know the farmer, right? What would it mean to stick to that? What would it mean to actually know how to cultivate and clean the ground? Ask for more trees so it can clean the land so that we can plant healthier plants. You know, all of these things we can also find related to other issues, right, in connection. So when we answer one thing, we do connect it to another.
Yeah, great. And Sister Kristen, I know food justice and food sourcing issues are really important to you as well. So I just want to open the door at this time for us to talk about food when we have that choice 3 times, potentially more a day if you do 4th meal. What should we be reaching for?
Where to start? Well, I think it's probably no secret that overconsumption of meat is a huge problem in our food industry. And that's one huge way that individuals can cut their carbon footprint. But there's also all kinds of other choices, like where is my food coming from? Is it local as much as possible? The concept of seasonal eating has been, I think, almost completely lost for most of us. You know, am I eating something that was grown here in season in the relative vicinity, or has it been shipped tomatoes from Chile in December? So I think there's decisions like that. And I don't know if you want to get into some of the connections with food and racism at this point, or if you're interested more in the daily choices. But I think one of the things that I've experienced in agriculture is the same extractive mentality that we use for fossil fuels and that guides our consumeristic paradigm is present in food. And so that's why we have factory farms. That's why we have a method of agriculture that just tries to pull as much as possible out of the soil, out of the animals, and out of the people doing the work without paying attention to what the long-term effect is. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And that's what sort of undergirds these choices. It's not just some fad. It's not just, it's healthier for us, yes, but it's about the long view and the bigger picture.
You know, and I see Leah nodding your head, so I want to go to you in a second, but I definitely want to say this ties back into the joy aspect, because food that's locally grown and seasonal tastes better than the stuff that's bred to be transported hundreds of miles. So it's an easy choice to make. There's an economic consideration, of course, and we have to acknowledge that, but there is joy in that process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Leah, I see you nodding. Tell us what you're thinking about as far as
I'm just co-signing all the way, you know. I appreciate you, because I'm just like, that point right there, that's right, because it's true, right? So let's talk about real quick, you know, CAFOs, right? Like these things, it wasn't set up originally to be so extractive as it is today, right? The gentleman who came up with it actually thought that he was preserving a lifestyle of farming. But in all actuality, he regrets it today. There's a beautiful is a beautiful video where they interview him and a couple of other folks throughout the United States that are affected by CAFOs, right? And the fact of the matter, I mean, if y'all have ever driven through different parts of Texas, you know when you're near a pig farm, right? And you see these structures, right? And it's basically corporate farming. These animals do not graze freely, right? They are stuck in small little troughs, and that just, they're chickens, they're all kinds of, you know, beef, or cows. And at the end of the day, what happens to the community? They are infected by the air pollution due to it, right? That causes upper respiratory issues, and also actual messes with their intestines, because it gets into the water, because where did all the feces and everything else go to? And they use that to also, they use all of the excretions, if you will, from the animals to go back into the land to feed the animals. So then what do you think we're eating, if that's what you choose to do so? And so yes, though our populations are growing, you know, is our answer to keep eating certain foods that at the end of the day do not benefit the betterment of our health? And then when we talk about fruits and vegetables, you know, there's a thing where it says, you know, if it don't have a seed, do you eat it? Because last time I checked, they're all supposed to have seeds, you know? Right. So like, sometimes just sticking to the bare basics of the things that we know to be true, and ask questions why, and demand the answer, will get us back to the fundamentals of what it means to be good stewards of creation.
Absolutely. And I think once people start doing a little bit of research, hopefully this will spark some curiosity in our listeners and viewers. But once you start researching about the production of soy and corn in this country, and that the majority of it is going to feed livestock, you can see the ripple effects of the simple choice that you make when you're at that table, and how you can affect change on such a grand scale. And Catherine, I know food is an issue that's close to your heart as well, as someone who worked on a Catholic worker farm. Tell me about your thoughts about the food system and what we need to know.
Karen, I'm so sorry. I think my internet is pretty unstable, and I think you asked about food. But I can't really tell, and I think I might defer to Sister Kristen on this one. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about, when we talk about including humankind in care of creation, we're just going to pivot just a little bit, which is something that came up. What does that look like when we're talking about caring for humankind as an aspect of creation? Sister Kristen?
So I think it's really instructive that the words human, humility, and humus, or soil, all come from the same root word. So, I mean, literally right there in our English language, we have the concept of being humble, being human, and being of the earth, all connected. and it's like Catherine said, we're not apart from, we are a part of Earth. And I think, you know, as a white person involved in agriculture, that's a huge thing. It's very important for me to maintain a stance of humility, because I think it's all too easy sometimes to appropriate ideas, systems. You know, there's permaculture is wonderful. It's a way of doing agriculture that looks at the good of the whole system. And at the same time, permaculture really is borrowed from and based on indigenous farming practices that have been practiced for millennia. So I think being human, being a part of Earth there's this concept in Laudato Si that Pope Francis uses. Again, it's integral ecology. It's a recognition that caring for Earth requires us to care for one another and vice versa. And I think, you know, we started with these land acknowledgements. I wanted to make sure to mention that that's a choice we made as the panelists, because I think we can't talk about caring for creation in the United States without acknowledging the forced displacement and genocide of Native peoples, nor can we overlook the fact that agriculture in this country were built using slave labor. And now 95% of farmers are white in the United States. So, so I think that kind of that whole picture points to me that at its very root, humility. That is what I am called to. I'm called to a stance of humility, and from there, I can act.
Which is a beautiful way to approach it. And I think we should also acknowledge that much of the harvesting work done in this country is done by migrant workers. And it's so distant from our experience when we're at that dining room table. It's easy to forget that that's tied into it. So let's talk more about that, about the relationship between care of the earth and racism and migration. Leah, there's a lot to unpack with that question, but
Can I jump in really quick?
Sure.
So I just wanted to build off of what Sister Kristen was just talking about before we moved on. I think that when we include humankind as an aspect of creation, it moves our work and our motivations out from a place of charity, of working on behalf of something that we are not inherently connected to, and moves that towards an understanding that our liberation is tied to the liberation of every other living thing. Robin Wall Kimmerer talked a lot about in her book this idea that all flourishing is mutual. And she is just a phenomenal Indigenous person who has really changed the way that I think a lot of people approach these conversations. But what she talked about is how viewing or considering ourselves as separate from the rest of creation, it creates a hierarchy where humans are inherently more valuable or more sacred than the rest of the life on Earth. And that historically has paved the way for considering the rest of creation as disposable or replaceable. But when we view ourselves as separate, I think that we are inherently viewing ourselves as better. And I don't think that will ever allow us to forge systems of true mutual flourishing or mutual liberation. And I think that it's a notion that is at the center, at the core, this idea that humans are separate from creation, that nature is, only defined by what it is not. And what it is not culture or not humans. And I think that is such a shame. It, I think, has been used to justify so much harm historically and continuously. And I think that it has been used to build so many infrastructures of harm. And I think to deconstruct those infrastructures, we have to deconstruct that notion, this idea that we are separate from creation. We have to deconstruct this idea that humans are somehow better than the rest of life on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And Leah, I still want to go back to this question. I know we're coming up to the time where we start taking audience questions, but I want to give you a chance to talk about that important intersection between care of the earth and racism, care of the earth and migration.
Thank you. And like all of what both of my co-panelists have said is true and definitely poignant to this point. there's two pieces, right? So of course, like I am part of the Sierra Club, and like this is this conversation that we have a lot, right? In a space in where we as an organization reconcile with the understanding that, John Muir, though he thought he needed to come in and, grateful for it to preserve the lands, and so where we have some amazing parks these days, but the people who were on it, what happened? Right. And so we have to get to a point of also, while we as whether scholars or various entities with backgrounds have an understanding about what's going on in a very high level way, we cannot forget about the people who actually are in relationship, right? And that's the original people who were on the land to begin with, right? And so how do we do justice to them, with them too? With them is part of the conversation. They're also addressing this in various ways, even in Africa, right? Where we're talking about a lot of these animal reserves. Folks are actually coming to the understanding that we cannot do this work as impactful as it should be if we don't do it with the tribes and the people who currently exist to this day, because nobody knows the ins and outs of that land better than the people who are there, right? So to Catherine's point, we are part of the creation. We literally are. If you come from any religious background, right? It talks about how we were crafted, right? And even if you want to do science, right? It's still, we were crafted in a way, right? So even talking about the melanin in our DNA, right? Is similar to what is in the plants. So take it for however you want, but the matter of factness is just what it is, right? And so how do we do this justly? And then, so when we talk about migration, if we do not, right? There's an article that I shared with the group to share for others to go back and refer to, that that is from the New York Times. Like, I'm located here in Missouri, that they project out to 2060. If we don't get this right, we will have in Missouri, I'm just reading it so I just don't get it wrong. Yeah. In Missouri and throughout the Midwest, people will experience weeks of web bulb. The temperatures will increase above 82 degrees and humidity thresholds that makes outdoor labor dangerous. Ooh. Now, it's already humid here. It's so humid in the Midwest. It's a joke that, like, it gets so humid that if you do your hair like mine is today, now my hair is not normally straight. It is curly, as curly can be. But if I do all of this wonderful gloriousness, and though I love my afro, at times I want this hair. I go out, you can open the door and see the difference between air condition and humidity. When as soon as you step out there, it all goes back to coils, right? Beautiful, luxurious coils, but that's not what I spent 3 hours doing, right? Yeah. So we must be very clear. And we're talking about people not being able to go outside and work.
Right.
So what does that mean? Yeah. And so that means an increase in other things. Like we already see it in the Gulf Coast, where if you think that you're hanging out on a beach that was natural and originally there, no, I'm sorry, that's been replaced multiple times. And throughout that article, it talks about how certain cities along the coast who have the money will be replenished and supported and preserved to the best of its abilities. But there's many who are not and who won't. And so what you have people, and just talking about our own country alone, will migrate more into the center. But if it's hot in the center too, now what are you going to do? So it's time that we have to start seeing these situations. Yes, they are bigger than us, but together as a community can move as one to change big things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start taking some questions from our audience. Let's start with this one. This is a big question and something all of us who do this work have struggled with, I'm sure. How do we convince climate change deniers that the threat is real? Any thoughts from any of you?
I mean, honestly, I'll just look at Texas. I mean, who said... Right? Like people who live in Texas, I have many friends growing up who didn't know nothing about no snow. At least it's not a blizzard. Yeah. Now that what happened down there was such a catastrophe that people died. People died because of how cold it was. That's not supposed to happen, especially not supposed to happen down there. Right. That in itself is the most extreme form of what climate change is as well. As much so as look at the increase of asthma that exists on people, on our children. You know, Catherine talks a lot about lifting up the voices of our youth. It is imperative that we do so because it's their lives that we're handing this over to, right? And so it's like, can we just pay attention to the effects of what we're doing today and how it's going to affect literally on the lives of those that we say we love on their tomorrow?
Yeah. And Catherine, I know you do a ton of advocacy work as well. How do you bridge that conversation with a climate change denier? Do you have any tips for the rest of us?
Gee, I don't mean to sound harsh, but I think that there are so many people that do believe that this is a problem and are unsure of how to channel their energy into effective methods of organization. And I have found that for my own spirit and for my own health, I generally try to focus on working with people like that. And I think that there are some people who are set on denying the existence of climate change. And why would I focus my energy on trying to change their minds if they are adamantly opposed to changing those minds? If they are curious, yes, let's please talk. If they have questions, I will do my best to find answers. But if they are unwilling to see the humanity that is being affected, not just in the future, but right now by climate change, I, on some level, walk away from that conversation. But I also think that the people out there like that are small. Like, I think that the number of people that are fiercely determined to deny the existence of climate change are not, they're not many. And I think that it is okay. I think it's okay to channel our energy in ways that benefit ourselves and our communities best. And I think for me, often that looks like walking away from those conversations.
That's a really good point, because you could invest all of your energy in trying to convince someone, or you could funnel that energy toward the work that needs to be done, right? Sister Kristen, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just had two quick things. I think first of all, I'm less concerned with convincing anyone about anything than I am about trying to find common ground for like a sense of shared humanity, concern for the well-being of our children. And I think, as much like Leah said, if we can point to, maybe the conversation isn't, okay, let's not talk about whether climate change and carbon is real. Let's look at how environmental degradation is impacting people right now. And one resource that I would really recommend, because I have a lot of respect for people who are willing to engage in these conversations. It's hard. Catherine Hayhoe, I can put her name in the resources, is an evangelical climate scientist. And she's put out some really wonderful stuff about how to have hard conversations with people who don't want to go there, who are denying that this is a problem. And I really appreciate that she specifically takes a faith lens, because sometimes those things overlap. And so look her up. If this is something that you're passionate about, go find Catherine Hayhoe.
Okay, great. And again, we'll share that resource on the website. Leah, quickly.
Yeah, quickly. Just one last thing. It's also important that we live by example, right? Sometimes people who want to hold on to an idea that oppresses others and or keeps the old, right, and prevents us to move towards the new, because it's fear, right? And whatever faith base you might come from or spiritual belief system you use, we cannot move in fear. Fear will keep us stagnant. So what we can do, though, is move with grace and love, acknowledge the humility and the humanity that we are, right? And then, we did one action here in Missouri by just pulling out, we went fishing, pulled out some unfortunate fish that were just saturated in coal ash, and had a barbecue as an action, and was like, if you don't believe this is a problem, well, then eat the fish.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, here it is. Sometimes it's just doing, to even like, there's nothing like having a barbecue, or having a barbecue and having farm tomatoes that are there versus the one from the grocery store, right? It's like night and day. And then people are like, well, where's that from? Well, what'd you do? And there we have it, right? Yeah. It's the shifting the conversation of values and what matters to certain people. Sometimes having the conversation about climate change is based off of, do you have the time to talk about that, versus, hey, my everyday life is saturated with all these other concerns.
Yeah. Quickly, I really want to get this question in because I think it's so important. How do you maintain hope in this situation? Sister Kristen?
You had to choose me first for that one, didn't you?
It's tough.
It is. And I do maintain hope. I think one thing I do is I'm pretty intentional about how much time I spend reading the news about climate, which is very important, and I need that. I'm intentional about balancing that with the things that nourish me. That there's, I've so appreciated the concept in many indigenous cultures of medicine. Food is medicine. We are medicine for one another. What restorative practices am I doing that that can buoy me to be about the work?
I love that. Leah, any thoughts on how to maintain hope?
Yeah, so I become hopeful every time I get a chance to step into spaces like this, get to know other people who are out here doing the work and various ways of doing it, knowing that, oh, that's not a way I would do it, but I'm grateful because we're all made up of all different kinds of people to make this whole thing go around. And looking at the children, looking at the youth who are stepping up right after and before, and are out here doing some amazing things. There's so much that has happened, right? That humanity ends up, taking charge when necessary, when all come together. And I believe that we'll get there. And I don't know, my liberation is very much so graded in this. So I need it desperately. And so I got nothing to do but hope. So
great. Catherine, any thoughts on how we can maintain hope?
I think for me, hope is forged through action. I think that it is the times when I feel the most hopeless are the times when I feel the most disconnected from these movements. But when I am living my life in a way that believes in a future where we can build new infrastructures, when I am committing myself and my thought to this work, we don't work for a planet that we think is going to fail. We work for a planet that we think is going to flourish. And I think that when I am engaged in that work, I am connected to that vision of flourishing, and I am connected to that hope. But I don't think hope precedes action. I think action precedes hope.
Well said. And to that end, let's move into action items. Each of our panelists have put together an action item that all of us can take back with us and put to work immediately, so we can see how change is possible. Sister Kristen, tell us about your action item.
All right. So loosely termed, my action item, shift toward a plant-based diet, for a lot of the reasons we've already mentioned. But I want to just qualify a few things. Access to food, I realize, is very inequitable. And so I think this is an important choice for those who can, as well as recognizing that because of the subsidies of processed food, that this isn't possible for everybody. There simply isn't access. But I think those of us who have the ability to do this can support local farms. This goes hand in hand. You can find a CSA, which is community supported agriculture, in your area. which often even gives you the chance to go volunteer on the farm and you get a reduced price. It's a way to get connected. It's definitely going to lower your carbon footprint. And I just moved to a new house, and my wonderfully accommodating housemates, my fellow sisters, have shifted toward a plant-based diet with me. And if you need any convincing, you can call them up and they will tell you that they are more thrilled about it than I thought they would be. So there's a lot on the internet. I mean, I'm not advocating a vegan purity, some kind of all or nothing, but I think it's one way that we can make an intentional choice that, like Catherine said, is 3 times a day.
Yeah, wonderful. Catherine, tell us about your action item.
Yeah, my action item is to have a mindful conversation with a child in your life about the earth. I think that I talk a lot about young people broadly, which I would be included in my definition of young people, but I think that I'm in this moment talking specifically about children, really, really young people. And I think that we as a society forget often that children are wise, that children are philosophers, and that children are naturally lovers of creation. And I think that for me also, with the question of where do I find hope, I find hope in circling back to conversations with children. And I find hope in talking to children who possess such awe and wonder for the world that we walk through, and letting that awe and wonder influence me in the way that I walk through the world too. And I think that my hope is that any child you have a conversation with can maybe shed some light on some new awe and wonder for you to incorporate into your practices as well.
Wonderful. And Leah, tell us about your action item.
Yeah, so, I just lift up for folks to just get involved. And there's a lot of meetings to attend. You can start your own meeting, whether you want to do a book club to look into what is environmental racism, to what is the history of environmental justice, to also just understand what is a plant-based diet and how to make that happen for your community. We all have a lane that we can walk in that allows us to sprinkle the magic, the blessings, the gifts that we were given, right? In order to see ourselves and our community shift to a space where we can see the climate actually benefit for all of us, instead of put us in a position where we're now in a space of loss and lack.
Wonderful action items. More information on all of these action items can be found on our website, of course. Thank you, Catherine, Sister Kristen, and Leah. We so appreciate your unique perspectives and the wisdom that you've brought to this conversation. And we're grateful that you were willing to share your expertise with us. And a special thank you to all of the individuals who are behind the scenes making this program possible. I want to point out that our entire team from the beginning has been comprised solely of women. From the initial planning stages to tech, promotions, episode execution, coordinating panelists, there are many brilliant women who have devoted countless hours to this project and who will continue to do so over the coming year. So thank you to all of those women. Next month on Exploring Intersections, Catholic Sisters on Racism, Migration, and Climate, our conversation focuses on migration. In the midst of family separations, mass detentions, and workplace raids, fear and anger have solid footholds on both migrants and the general public. Some believe building walls is the answer. Others want to build bridges to citizenship. Can better understanding the root causes of migration help us to more effectively address the crisis? And how do racism and climate change play into this human rights disaster? As always, our panelists will have their work cut out for them, and the conversation is bound to be compelling. That's Exploring Intersections on Migration, May 12th at 3 p.m. Central Time. Thank you for joining us today. This series is made possible through the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Region 10. Visit our website, exploringintersections.org, to find resources mentioned in today's conversation and to register to attend our next program. We broadcast live every second Wednesday of the month at 3 p.m. Central. If you'd like to revisit this conversation or a past program, you can find it on our YouTube channel or download a podcast version from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or just go to our website. And be sure to connect with us for the continuing conversation on Facebook. I'm Cherish Badzinski. Thanks for tuning in to Exploring Intersections.